What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It's been a little bit since I dropped anything, super Steelers specific, because we've just been hammering out the draft content with the podcast and try to mix in some film rooms as well where I can. But it's time to start cranking out some free agency stuff. I'm really excited about just over the past, 4 or 5 days or so. We've been grinding through the film, just looking at all these different available players. I've been able to compile, a pretty nice list of about 8 players I'm going to talk about in this video as far as potential signings. I got them in 3 different tiers. We got potential splash signings, some notable upgrades, and then we're going to talk about some interesting dart throws. We're going to be focusing on the cornerback position. I feel like that's an area that the Steelers will probably look to address in free agency, potentially the draft as well. But it's definitely an area of need. So I'm not just strictly focusing on guys that I like necessarily, but also these guys have to have the traits that this team typically covets while also being a good fit within their scheme. So when the offseason began, you guys probably remember I did a video, kind of ranking the Steelers' top offseason needs. If you recall, I actually put boundary corner and slot corner both within the top 5. I still feel that way too. Joey Porter Jr. is a player that I'm really excited about. Still really like his potential. Outside of that, there's not really much else on the roster. Dante Jackson, Cam Sutton were 2 other starting corners on the roster last year. Don't really have any particularly interest in bringing those guys back, if I'm being completely honest with you. I've always liked Corey Trice's potential, but like Omar Khan said today in Indianapolis at the Combine, the durability issues are what they are. It's kind of tough to kind of really depend on him. So they're going to need to make some additions. And I think that the free agency market actually has some guys that will pique their interest. As of right now, Pittsburgh has about $60 million in cap space, plenty of other avenues to create even more cap room as well, with restructures, extensions, cuts, things like that. Obviously, this isn't their only need, right? But I would be very disappointed, honestly, if they left free agency without acquiring at least like one starter level player. I would be pretty upset if they didn't do that. I still think there's a potential that they could add 2 corners to the room before we get to the draft season. I'll leave for the NFL Combine in just a few hours, but I really wanted to get this out for you guys before I left. It was a goal of mine. So if you guys could just do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe, hit the bell, all that stuff. I really appreciate it. It helps the channel grow. Drop me your feedback in the comments, not just on the video, your thoughts on these players as well, other positional groups that you guys would like me to see me dive into as free agency kind of gets going here. A couple weeks away from the legal tampering period. I'm really excited to do this again this year. It was a lot of fun combing through these videos last year, doing the film rooms, all that stuff. So my first player that I'm going to talk about, I think is a pretty obvious name. There are some obvious names on this list, and there are also some names I think will be surprises to some people that necessarily aren't getting talked about by a lot of different people. So I think this is kind of a unique list. But first person I'm going to talk about is Charvarius Ward, coming from the San Francisco 49ers, former Kansas City Chief. If you were to ask me to look at the list of free agents this year and which one of these guys has the most potential to make the biggest impact over the next season or two, I'm going to bet on Charvarius Ward. 6 foot, 206 pounds, over 32-inch arms, definitely fits the prototype of guys they typically like on the boundary. It was obviously a rough calendar year for him. He lost his 1-year-old daughter, and as a father, I can't really comprehend how he was able to keep pushing through that. For obvious reasons, I'm not putting virtually any stock into his film last year with everything that he had going on. I'm more so focused on how dominant he was in 2023. Ward will be 29 years old at the start of next season. So I'll mention guys like their age and throughout the video. And that's just the age that they're going to be week 1, because that's ultimately what matters. But, you look at Ward's film, he can do it all. Literally everything. He could bump a run. He could play motor mirror. He could play from a scooch technique, off coverage. He can read the body language, the eyes of the quarterback. He's comfortable with his back to the sideline in a side saddle or bell technique. Really savvy veteran. He's physical, man. He loves to get his hands on guys and force receivers to work around his body. Really savvy, just in terms of his hand usage. He's really good at doing the whole hand fighting thing down the field, establishing a contact key to get a good feel for when receivers are trying to break off routes on him. He just plays with a ton of confidence, man. He's a guy that really trusts his speed when you watch him on film. Is a really confident player, and I think that's a big part of playing that position at a high level. I don't think it's any surprise that he's been so good over the past several seasons now. He plays the football with the ball in the air. He gets his head around during the back shoulder phase. I think he's really smart just to understanding situational ball. Third down, red zone, different formational tells, stuff like that. He's an outstanding tackler too, and that's one of the reasons why I like his game so much. He's a career 5.2 50% missed tackle rate for a corner. That's really absurd, man. Like if you can get guys that are 10% at the cornerback position, that's pretty good. A 5% rate is like outstanding. So I do think sometimes his play style can lead to him being a little bit overzealous, a little bit over grabby. But you just kind of take the good with the bad with that sort of stuff. He has a ton of really competitive reps on film. So Spotrac has him at 3 years, 45 million. And again, I'm using them in PFF to kind of get like guesstimated, market values, things like that. They have him at about 15 million per year, average contract value. That really matches what the Niners gave him just 3 years ago. He's one of the rare corners that can play zone and man at equally high level. That makes him pretty unique in that regard. He's a winner. He's been to the Super Bowl. He's won a Super Bowl. He's been to multiple championship games with 2 different teams now. If you just look up and down the Steelers roster, man, like they don't have a lot of playoff experience because they ain't been winning playoff games in a long time. And Ward was the guy that the Niners brought in and said, like, hey, we need this archetype of player to try to help us take this defense to the next level, try to put us over the top. And, they fell short, but I think this past season was the first time in his career that he didn't make the playoffs. So, I mean, he's just been a part of some really good defenses, has traveled with number 1 wide receivers across the formation week to week. Like you look at different battles that he's had over the years, man, like you go back 2 years ago, matched up really well with DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, those caliber of players. And to come into Pittsburgh, if you're talking about a splash signing and you're really shooting for the upside to try to take this defense from, pretty good where it was last year to truly elite, this is the type of player that could potentially do that for you, provided, he's in a good mental space. But, just reading up on it, man, seems like he's ready to go. He's interested in continuing his football career. So he's the guy that I'm really rooting for, regardless of whether it's in, the Steel City or not. Next guy I'll go to, kind of a similar value of player. Not as high on this player. He would probably be like the number 2 like talent on this list. It's going to be Carlton Davis. He played for Detroit last year, longtime Tampa Bay Buccaneer. This is a guy I've been a fan of for a really long time, man. He spent 7 seasons in the league. He's been playing at a really high level for the vast majority of that. You just look at Davis when he's out there on film. He just jumps off the page. I mean, he's like 6'1", 205 pounds. He's got an enormous wingspan. Like when he's in his stance, his hands are almost like touching his shoestrings. He's 94th percentile for length at the position. He just has really long levers. So last year in Detroit, we actually got to see him in a different scheme, which I kind of like because it gives us more of a proof of concept to what he could potentially be asked to do here in Pittsburgh. But it was a more man-heavy system. He turned in a highly productive campaign, and I think it speaks volumes about the style that Aaron Glenn wanted to play on their defense. They just didn't really have the dudes, so they went out. They drafted a couple of corners high, but they also like traded for Carlton Davis, and that was a good investment for them. I think they'll probably be wanting to bring him back. Who knows if he actually hits the open market, but if he does, I like the fit in Pittsburgh. What I love about Davis is just he's got really good patience at the line of scrimmage, a lot of press reps on his tape. He understands where his help is and how to maintain his leverage. So he just understands how to like funnel guys to his help, maintain his leverage by staying square. He could toggle between, playing that motor mirror technique where he's kind of feathering off the line of scrimmage with pretty soft, quick feet for his size. And then he'll also like mix in some really aggressive jams. And he's got good hand placement on those jams too. Like he can jolt guys backwards. He's got a really strong punch that very rarely misses when he does mix that in. Just very technically sound, like I said, allows him to consistently stay in phase. Super smart player. Like you just get the sense that he's like really, really dialed in to the film room. Just over the past couple of years, I was kind of like looking up some of his pass deflections and targets and things like that. There's like multiple times where he'll get like formational tells throughout the game when teams like are trying to run RPOs or trying to run screens at him. Like he picked off a screen that I recalled against Atlanta when I was studying Arthur Smith's offense a year or two ago. And then also like he almost had a similar play this past season against Green Bay. They ran the same formation twice within the first half. And the second time they did it, they were trying to run this little RPO like spear screen where they, throw it out to the flat to the number 3 player. And he, like, as soon as they get into this formation, like you can see him making like a hand motion and he's telling this guy, like, I'm about to trigger on this. And he like goes and breaks the pass up, almost comes away with an interception. So another thing that I like is just he's been around the game for a long time. He's competed against a lot of different body types throughout his career. He's just got a really short memory, man, as a corner. And that's a very important trait that I value. I just think it's it's an underrated part of like how we discuss the position. The cornerback position is really volatile. You're going to get beat on plays. I personally think it's like the second most difficult position to play in the NFL just because of how athletic all these different guys are, how much technique and nuance there is to playing the sport, and how the rules are honestly slanted against you. But one thing I like about Davis is like he'll get beat on one play, the very next play he's up at the line of scrimmage ready to go, and trying to take the fight to a receiver. There were a couple times in the 2 games that I was able to get to from his film this past season where he was beat for a first down, comes back, very next player the play after was able to break up a pass. It's like that type of stuff, like being able to get himself back in the game and bounce back from rough reps. I mean, he's got 4,000 coverage snaps over the course of his career. He's 28. He'll be 28 years old at the start of the season. So just a ton of experience. His injury history, like you look that up, it's somewhat lengthy, and it does worry me a little bit. He seems to be a guy that's like banged up a lot. He'll miss a couple games here and there. He actually broke his jaw, I believe, at the end of the season this past year. Unfortunate injury, but he will play through, those nagging type of injuries and things like that. His size and technique will mask like his overall lack of like elite athleticism, but he does lack kind of the ideal recovery speed that you would really desire from that position, right? So not necessarily a perfect player, but someone who's been a very productive pro throughout his career. So that's why he's a little bit maybe lower than a guy like Charvarius Ward. I just think Ward has a little bit more athleticism to his game, a little bit more of recovery ability, even if Davis is like more of like a trusted kind of technician in that regard. But he's projected 3 years, 41 million, almost 14 AAV. Seems about right, honestly. He would be an excellent mentor for Joey Porter Jr. Like you look at I was reading up on some of the interviews and just different things. It seems like he took some of the Detroit guys this past season, the rookies, under his wing. And he's somebody that I think like Joey could really learn from. So I like that fit. If you're talking about looking at a guy who has, some upside to him, and this is a player who I think isn't getting like enough recognition. Maybe it's just like because of how bad this team was last year, especially like when he was playing. But Paulson Adebo from New Orleans. And for full transparency, man, like I wasn't a huge fan of Adebo's college film when he was coming out for various reasons. But I really think over the past 2 years, he was a guy who struggled early on in his career, but bounced back, got himself back in the lineup. He's still 26 years old. And I think over the past year and a half, before he got hurt this past year, I think he turned in some really quality film. So 3rd round pick back in 2021, learned under guys, Marshawn Lattimore, Dennis Allen. They've always been really good about developing DBs there. He's 6'1", 200 pounds, 76th percentile in terms of wingspan. Adebo, a plethora of press coverage reps. He in their system, they were asked to play a lot of man, a lot of trail technique, very fluent in terms of like passing off routes, route recognition, things like that. He's another guy who likes to get his hands on at the line of scrimmage. He wants to try to kind of stall out those routes, disrupt the timing with his physicality. When he gets threatened vertically, one of the things I like is like he does a really good job with his positioning. You'll consistently see him like pin guys up against the sideline, use that as an extra defender. I like that a lot. Like I said, good communicator for sure. You guys know how I feel about PFF's like coverage charting, but seven interceptions, 18 pass breakups in the last year and a half. Like that's outstanding ball production. So some of those interceptions, can be debated on like how impressive they are, whatever. But the dude does find himself around the ball. I do think that he has good short area bursts. He's a little bit of a linear athlete, not as great in terms of like changing direction, but he can drive on the ball with pretty good quickness. Also, one of the things I liked about him is in 2023, he had multiple punch outs on ball carriers. That was good too, just like to create those extra turnovers, creating havoc, creating chaos, things like that. In terms of like deficiencies, like I said, the change of direction stuff, like he's pretty stiff in the hips. So it does like cause some delay with his transitions when he's asked to like really flip and turn and run. And also like he's coming off a broken femur. Like he broke his femur, I think, in or sometime around like mid-season last year. But basically like from what I've read, he's already running on the treadmill like 21 miles an hour. And dunking a basketball as well. So it seems like, I don't think he could go out there and put on pads today, but it seems like he's a guy who's going to be ready for camp. And I think that won't necessarily prohibit him from getting a nice contract in free agency. They're projecting him 2 years, 22 million. I looked at various different sources, different projections, things like that about what he could command on the open market. Dude, I have no idea. what he could get. He's a really interesting case study because I think his game was really ascending at the right time. You always want to be playing your best ball when you come around to a contract year, right? But at the same time, like, he is coming off a pretty serious leg injury. So I think it might behoove him personally to take like maybe a prove it deal, maybe a 1 year deal or something like that to try to prove that, his legs back because he's still young enough to cash in, right? He's only gonna be 26 years old. You can still cash in like big bucks at 27, provided you go out there and put good tape on film the next year. But Adebo is a guy I think definitely fits what the Steelers could potentially be looking for. And someone that I think that they should at least give consideration to see like what his market's going to be. And we all know about New Orleans, like how they handle the cap. They somehow keep it rolling, but they are in pretty dire straits right now from a cap flexibility standpoint. So I'm not sure if they're actually going to be able to afford him this time around. So next player is going to be Asante Samuel Jr., also 26 years old, Los Angeles Chargers, former second-round pick. This was one of my guys coming out of the 2021 draft. So a lot of you OG supporters probably remember my I just said love affection for his game. I just really liked how smooth he was in coverage and how much confidence he had out there on the boundary. Obviously, NFL bloodlines. His dad, Asante Samuel, one of the better ball hawks of his era, really underrated player. He is undersized, 5'10", 180 pounds. I will throw him on here. A lot of the guys that we're going to discuss are bigger, longer boundary corners, right? Because we kind of think that that's normally where the Steelers kind of like to go. They have certain thresholds that they like their cornerbacks to get to from a size standpoint. But as we saw with the Dante Jackson trade last year, I think that that tells us those are more preferences than necessarily roadblocks. You know what I'm saying? If they really like the player enough and they have other traits that kind of mask the deficiencies that they may have in the size category, they may be more willing to kind of overlook some of those thresholds. And Samuel's kind of a guy that kind of falls into that. He has a really similar build to Dante Jackson. And there are some similarities, honestly, with their game. So his feet are really light, impressive click and close ability, man. This dude can drive on the ball in a flash. Very fluid when it comes to changing directions, sticky in coverage, soft shoe press guy in his bag, really good at mirroring the direction of receivers. Wasn't asked to do a lot of press coverage stuff in LA. I'm just I think that was mostly a scheme thing, but I also think like it is difficult when you're 180 pounds to try to get up there and press like X receivers when you're giving up sometimes 20, 30 pounds of muscle, but mostly lines and off coverage. But he really makes his money in terms of like his just natural playmaking ability. Honestly, he's a risk taker, and that's something that I think a lot of coaches will really appreciate. He has very, very good ball skills. His first 3 seasons in the league, he picked off 9 passes, broke up 30 more. So this dude like has the playmaking ability to really flip the game on an instant. In terms of negative for his like scouting report, he's just a horrific tackler, man. Like both in terms of results and technique. I also think like I would like to see his temperament from a tackling perspective really be kicked up a notch, or sometimes where I feel like he doesn't necessarily want to tackle. That doesn't necessarily fit the Steelers mold, but they have brought in quite a few corners over the past several years that have been bad run defenders or been bad tacklers. Some of those guys improved. Some of them didn't, but that's just something you have to be mindful of. I do think like the way that like his movement skills definitely transition. I think a lot of people maybe misconstrue Samuels for a slot corner because of his size, or maybe somebody that they consider like having inside-outside versatility. The tackling thing does make it difficult to envision him like playing really a slot type of role. He would need to take massive strides in terms of like his tackling, his ability to fit the run and things like that for me to really consider him a true slot guy. But he is someone that could probably go in there on third downs and obvious passing situations and man guys up because he has that type of mobility. But it's a different game on the interior. So they got him projected, man, 4 years, $45 million. That just seems awfully high because he only played 4 games last year. He dealt with a shoulder injury. I'm not really sure like what the injury specifically was, but I can't imagine that he's not going to be ready to go for like OTAs and things like that. But I don't know like what his standing is in LA. I know they were surprisingly pretty solid up until the very last moments kind of this season on defense, even without him. But seems like he's somebody that they'll probably allow to hit the open market. Like I said, he's somebody whose value I really find it tough to gauge, but at a position that is extremely volatile, a lot of highs, a lot of lows, like Samuel really fits that billing. I could see Samuel putting together a season where he's one of the best cornerbacks in the league. And I could also see a situation to where like he's just like making you so frustrated you want to bench him. So um, next guy is like a guy that I haven't heard talked about really from anywhere. And I was pleasantly surprised with his film. It's Mike Jackson from Carolina. Going to be 28 years old next year. He's a former fifth round pick out of Miami. He's bounced around a little bit, but the size is really what kind of drew me to his film. He's 6'1", 210 pounds, 32-inch arms. His weight's in the 96th percentile for the position. He's been around the block, like I said, but he's developed in Seattle. Pete Carroll, Carl Scott, two of the best defensive back minds in the game. They have a very lengthy developmental track record. So the fact that he's worked with those guys makes me feel pretty good about like, where he's headed, his trajectory. He had 13 pass breakups in Carolina last year. He started every single game. He's really strong. He's a solid tackler. He's a willing run defender with good hit power. He does drive guys backwards. He doesn't allow a ton of yards after contact. Played mostly off coverage. He can adequately pedal for a bigger guy, at least for the first couple steps. He has a pretty controlled back pedal. He's good at reading body language, understanding like when he needs to drive on routes with urgency. Plays the catch point in those spots as well. And there weren't a lot of like big plays or times where I felt like receivers were able to stack him and get past him vertically. There are times where he can kind of prematurely open the gate. He is a little bit susceptible in terms of like getting beat in the intermediate area. That was something that I kind of noted when I watched a couple games of him. But I need to go back and watch the Seahawks tape to see what the technique looks like in press, because like J.C. Horn would sometimes get up and press. It wasn't a ton, but I think I saw one rep from Jackson in press that wasn't in the goal line area. So I don't know. But I kind of asked around to some Seahawks film guys that I really trust about like, is this a guy that can play at the line of scrimmage? And they said, yeah, like he could do it. He did it in Seattle. So again, I had to go like track that film down and kind of get time to sit down and watch it. But that'll be something more so if like they actually sign him than anything else. But it was good kind of getting that positive feedback. They've got him projected at a 3-year around $23 million, so less than $8 million per season. This is kind of where we I would say like him and Samuel wouldn't necessarily qualify for me as like splash signings. They would just be like in the notable upgrade column. I do think that they offer you a little more upside than the guys that the Steelers have had at the CB2 spot over the last however many years. But Jackson, like for 3 years, $23 million, depending on what the guarantees are, like he definitely has the talent to pay that thing off. And he was someone whose film I was pleasantly surprised by. And I think, I've kind of been a little bit confused why he hasn't generated more buzz. I think a lot of this, some of these other guys that we're going to talk about on this list just didn't play on very good defenses. And that's the thing. Like, but the Steelers aren't necessarily out here trying to get like a CB1 type in free agency. They do need a starter and somebody that they can depend on. And I think that Jackson is a guy that you can kind of set it and forget it, honestly, if you feel pretty good about his film. I would want to go back and see a couple more games to where I feel like 100% definitively in that boat. But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by what I saw on tape. So next player we're going to kick inside a little bit. We're going to talk about Nate Hobbs from Vegas. This has been a really popular name on Twitter, so I think everybody's kind of connected the dots here. The Steelers just hired Gerald Alexander to come coach in their secondary. He was in Vegas. He coached Nate Hobbs. So, like, he has a really good relationship, I would imagine, with him. Very aware of his strengths and weaknesses. But this is a former fifth-round pick. He really burst on the scene as a rookie. Been a constant for that Raiders defense since that point. The best way I can really describe Nate Hobbs, man, he's a really useful defender. He's a good team defender. In coverage, he's at his best when he's reading the quarterback with his eyes on the ball. He works well through trash on like mesh concepts and through bunch formation, something the Steelers kind of struggle with a little bit at times down the stretch last season. He plays the screen game with aggression, will take on blocks, slip blocks, has some outside versatility too. You think back to like 2022, he actually played like 500 coverage snaps on the outside. So that's not his game. Like, if I'm the Steelers and I'm bringing him in here to play, he's going to play the nickel for me. But at the same time, it's good to have versatility down your depth chart to know if injuries happen, things like that, you have some comfortability putting him on the outside. But you watch this dude, like where he makes his money, man. He's like a dog that you just got to let off the leash, let him attack downhill, get into the backfield. He can set the edge. He knifes through gaps when he's in the run fit. We typically talk about Steelers defenders, right? We talk about guys that play with a lot of effort, right? He's a high effort player. You'll see him run plays down from behind, things like that. He had a really nice hit on Jaylen Warren, I think last year, if I remember, in their game. But you look in those we've seen the Raiders several times over the past 3-4 years when Hobbs has been in Vegas. It seems like Mike Tomlin's talked pretty glowingly of him and the how he does the the weekly press conferences where he kind of previews the team. He's mentioned Hobbs by name. In terms of like being a guy that you can put out there and play nickel to some heavier personnel on offense. So if a team wants to come out in 12, you can kind of stay in your nickel formations if you want to, just because Hobbs is such a good run defender and he's willing to come up and scrap a little bit near the line of scrimmage. There's also some potential meat left on the bone, maybe as a blitzer. I think like he could really do good with that. The Steelers haven't really been blitzing their nickel a lot. I don't know if that's like, just because they don't have somebody they like in that, that mode or what that deal is though. But I don't think man coverage skills are necessarily a strength. So if you kind of notice when I've been talking about these guys, man coverage skills kind of like one of the prerequisite things that I was kind of looking for when searching through these free agents. He does have a habit of opening the gate prematurely. It just allows like some of these like shiftier route runners to kind of create some separation at the break point against him. But he does absorb contact pretty well at the break point. Guys just can't like push him around. He's got some like wiry strength to him. He's still an upgrade in my eyes from like what the team has had and what they've deployed over the past several seasons. Like I said, I don't really have any interest in bringing Cam Sutton back. I think Beanie Bishop, like the fact that they were willing to play Cam Sutton over him down the stretch last year kind of tells me that they don't value him a ton. He's projected like 1 year, $2.9 million deal. Pro Football Focus has him at a 1 year, $4 million deal. To me, I think that's nice value. I have no idea like if that's actually what he's going to be searching for or whatever, but I think that's a pretty good value. Patrick Graham is back in the fold in Vegas, somebody that I really respect from a defensive coordinator perspective. It wouldn't surprise me if he wanted to get him back, but we'll see if he's able to hit free agency. That's some of the cons I feel like of me doing this list at this point is like there will be additional guys released, but I felt like I wasn't going to be able to do the combine stuff and get all of these guys out there to you guys in the requisite amount of time if I didn't get started a little bit early. So the next two guys are kind of more what I would call like dart throws. So maybe not necessarily set it and forget it type of starters, but guys that I do think maybe haven't been discussed as potential fits that I do think the Steelers will at least like maybe check in on. And one of them is Noah Igbenogany from the Commanders. Don't freak out on me, okay? I can already see the comments. The eyes are probably rolling a little bit, but everybody knows Igbenogany was a bust when he went to the Dolphins. He was a first-round pick. I totally get it. He was a raw player coming out of college. He was overdrafted. Things didn't work out, kind of moved on. Last year in Washington, he got more playing time than he ever has. And he kicked inside for the first time ever too. So like he's the second like slot corner that I'm talking about in this list. But I think there are flashes on film. He has a stocky build. He's got some nice length. He's still a pretty charged up, energetic mover. He has the athleticism to kind of undercut routes. But I actually wasn't watching film on him originally or planning to. I got some good insight from a buddy of my DB coach that I needed to kind of check out his film from this past season and started watching through some stuff. And, I kept noticing like his man coverage reps are pretty solid. And then I looked at the numbers and I think they'll actually surprise you guys because I know they surprised me. He had 178 man coverage snaps from the slot last season. He was targeted 22 times. He only gave up 8 catches and he broke up 5 passes. Hey, man, that's pretty good. I'll take that. Those are pretty good numbers, man. But full transparency, I think his technique still needs work. So like he's nowhere near a finished product. I don't think he's made the strides that I think a lot of people anticipated him making coming out of college. And I don't think the game's like quite slowed down for him in terms of like from a processing standpoint. But he played on the vet minimum last year and was a starter pretty much throughout the season. He came in and gave them good minutes inside in the nickel spot, and they actually kicked Mikey Sainristil out to outside corner. So they showed some confidence in him for sure. But I'm definitely down to add him to the mix on the cheap and allow him to compete for a starting gig. So like maybe if the Steelers were to go get a guy like Charvarius Ward or something like that and spin and make a big splash signing, maybe Igbenogany is the second guy they sign in free agency. You get him on a relatively cheap deal. It's not necessarily somebody that you're going to guarantee a starting spot, but it leaves you with more flexibility in terms of like your draft board when you go into draft weekend, to where like if you like a guy like Igbenogany is not the type of player that you're like, okay, like we can't draft over this dude. We have too much of a financial investment in him or anything like that. But he also like gives you a nice little fallback option to where if you don't address it, maybe you do feel better about how you had it last year with Sutton. I do think he's a better player, a better scheme fit at this current time, just because of his athleticism. So it's kind of where I think about that. He was one of the surprise names that I wanted to kind of pop on here. The next guy, also another Commanders. This is the last dude we're going to talk about is Benjamin St. Juice. The size, man, is just it's insane. He's over 6'3", 200 pounds, really long levers. When I watch this kid, he kind of reminds me a little bit of Ahkello Witherspoon, and that's kind of why I wanted to include him on the list. Not just from like a play style and execution standpoint, but just like there's just a lot of similarities there. The highs are pretty awesome. Like you look at like the 2023 film, he had 13 pass breakups, I think, that season. So that's pretty solid, from an outside corner. And I think just like watching him move, I mean, typically those bigger corners aren't usually this fluid like he is, but kind of like Spoon, he could play off coverage, he could pedal a little bit, he can feather at the line of scrimmage. He's got those long arms to kind of disrupt guys when he wants to get his hands on in zone. One of the things I really liked about his game was he showed really good like spatial awareness and feel for route combinations. I didn't expect for him to be this like super high IQ player, but I thought like he actually understand like route combinations pretty well. He made a couple of really nice plays, kind of sinking underneath zones and getting underneath throws and getting his hands on, or like at least forcing errant throws out of bounds and things like that on third down last year. He is high hipped. He needs to be better in terms of like actually using his length to his advantage, getting hands on receivers more consistently, being a little bit more poised when the ball comes his way, things like that. So there's a lot of stuff that does need to be cleaned up. But I think rep to rep, there's a lack of consistency, but you also see like the athleticism shine. And I do think that that's going to attract people in free agency, even if, the tape or the production hasn't necessarily been great. And obviously Washington has looked to kind of upgrade over him. They traded for Marshawn Lattimore at the trade deadline last year. Lattimore didn't really play well when he came to Washington, but I do think that they're probably ready to move on from St. Juice. I don't see market value anywhere. I don't think he's going to be like a highly sought after free agent by any means, but for like a multi-year starter, a guy with plenty of experience, I think for a fallback option, you bring into camp, kind of see how he performs, how he takes to the coaching, how he takes to the scheme, things like that. And you just let him compete. So like he would be a guy that I would think, if, we take Khan's word at face value, obviously the durability for Corey Trice Jr. is, a hindrance, right? Something we're worried about. You bring in St. Juice, you let those guys compete for the top backup spot, right? And maybe that's, one of the things that you do as a fallback option. You roll the ball out there and say like, hey, best man wins. That is what it is. So I like that option as kind of like a fallback kind of dart throw, just because I like the tools and I'm not ready to completely give up on him, even if I don't think he's ever going to be this like really, really top end like starter by any stretch of the imagination. But that was a lot. I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. I know I've been talking about doing this for, a week or so now. It's been really fun to go through these guys' film. If I didn't talk about a player, there could be various reasons behind that. I was mostly focusing on guys that were under 30 years old. This is it's a stopwatch position. So that's just the reality of it. Because it's a stopwatch position, it's a young man's game out there, and it's really tough. Like you got to be able to really run. So free agents over 30, not really usually the Steelers' cup of tea. Not my preference either when we're talking about the cornerback position, if I'm being completely honest. So that could be a reason. The other reasons would be like either I watched them and didn't love the film, or I just don't think that they're a really good scheme fit. But if you do have like other guys that you think I should watch, or if you want my thoughts on, you could drop those in the comments and I'll respond to as many as I can, at least for the guys that I watch. And if you do drop me a name, maybe that I miss in the list, I'll go through and kind of watch those guys as well, and maybe tweet out some clips or something like that on social media. But I really do appreciate you guys' continued support. Be sure to hit that bell on the way out, like the video, all that stuff. Should have some more content this week. I am headed, like I said, here in a couple of hours to Indianapolis. Really excited to attend my 4th combine. Hopefully get you guys some good insights, some good information. Excited to talk to these players that I've been watching film on for the past however many months. So as always, I appreciate the continued support. Peace and love.